Trials was one of the greatest game modes to ever grace the Destiny community. It inspired a lot of playtime, skill, and in some cases, viewership on Twitch. Ultimately, however, Trials of Osiris and its later iteration, Trials of the Nine, have been shelved by Bungie in favor of more PvE game modes, this much to the dismay of the PvP community. But with Bungie's promise to have a renewed focus on the Crucible, some hope that its return in Shadowkeep is inevitable. So with that, I want to take a look at this new and improved Trials and what it would look like and offer some new suggestions to try and optimize its gameplay. Like I said before, Trials in both its incarnations was a staple of Destiny. It not only was incredibly fun to play, but also gave rise to some Twitch channels who would run Trials help on the weekends. That was also part of the fun. It was advertised as a weekly tournament to test player skills, and it did exactly that. Hundreds and even thousands of streams popped up every weekend to showcase their skill in the Crucible. It also gave rise to websites like Trials Report dedicated to helping players understand their opponent's stats and win rate. There were even entire communities dedicated to helping Guardians reach the ultimate goal of Trials, going flawless with 9 wins or 7 in Destiny 2. The popularity of the game mode of course extended very far into Destiny as well. Trials was very unique due to it being one of the few PvP modes that required you to also have a very high light level in order to actually be competitive. This meant that before you could even begin, you needed to be somewhat decent at PvE in order to get a high enough light level to compete, and later in its life it also required you to have a fire team with matchmaking being disabled. Also, as I mentioned before, the ultimate victory, going flawless, was a crown jewel of the Destiny PvP. Going flawless, especially in D1, meant that you pushed through constant adversity and highly skilled players to end up at the top of the ladder, those final games being one of the most intense PvP experiences I've ever had in any game. With all that Trials was, I want to first address the notion that says Trials may never return. I see this as really improbable. Not only was Trials loved by the community, it was a staple of Destiny in general. It would bring in incredible moments to the game and to its players, and not to mention was quite profitable as well. It would bring a lot of attention to Destiny every weekend when it was streamed on Twitch, thus giving it a lot of relevance in the overall gaming world. And so with all this taken into account, I really don't think Bungie would just scrap this amazing idea that does so much for Destiny as a whole. Also with that in mind, I don't think Bungie would change it too much, at least not at its basic foundation. If Bungie does implement Trials back into the game, the first thing we would see is probably the following. At the height of its popularity and difficulty, the game was 3v3. While Destiny 2 was somewhat gone away from the 3v3 game mode, I still think Bungie will try to emulate Trials when it first was created, thus being at its core a 3v3 game mode. The question really would be is if they would make new maps for this. The current D2 map pool really isn't meant for 3v3, so we really have to see if they actually add new ones. The next thing we would probably continue to see is light level advantages being enabled. The original goal with Trials was to make it the ultimate form of PvP, thus meaning that you also need to be good at other parts of the game to play it. At first, I believe D2 had this disabled in Iron Banner. This decision was not very popular, so I could see it being enabled in new Trials. The flawless system will probably be the last thing that will stay somewhat consistent with what it used to be. It will most likely be either the 9-0 system with boons of D1 or the straight 7-0 system of D2. Honestly, while I think the 9-0 system would be a cool staple and sort of callback to D1, I can see Bungie going for the 7-0 system, solely based on their love of number 7, and the fact that you wouldn't really need to buy boons like you did in D1. However, getting into some of the new things may be difficult to predict. Obviously, we will see that new weapons will be introduced, a new lighthouse or reward for flawless, and of course new weapons. But beyond that, things can get sort of gray. Here are some of the things that, based on their past updates, may happen in new Trials. Currently, heavy ammo is enabled in all forms of PvP except for scrims. However, based on some past systems for heavy ammo, I believe there will be a significant change to how it works today for Trials and maybe PvP in general. Back in D1, heavy would only spawn once in the game, and with it would bring a couple of minutes of heavy ammo fun, or in most cases just straight chaos. But it would then promptly return to the normal state with supers and primary ammo. This would be what would happen in Trials. Like in D1, new Trials would have one round where heavy ammo can be picked up. It also may spawn for both teams in their respective areas, thus giving both teams a chance to use it against each other. I don't think heavy ammo would ever just be banned outright. Heavy ammo is a very big item in PvP, and Bungie just may not have any intention of removing it. Regarding supers, Bungie has stated that roaming supers are overdue for some counter in Shadowkeep. However, again, while some may like it, I don't see Bungie having any reason to just straight up ban it. Not even scrims ban supers, thus for them to just remove it from the game mode would be somewhat odd thing to do. The only thing I see happening is maybe, and really just a maybe, is lowering the amount of supers per game to make it more fair fight. Anything more than that, the game may even feel somewhat dry or less diverse. Another ammo aspect I see having a slight change could be how special ammo works. Way back in year 2 of D1, special ammo got a rework that resulted in working much like power ammo works today. There would be a crate that would spawn somewhere on the map which allowed players to refill their special guns or add more to existing ammo. This would be seen as very unpopular, especially back then. However, those days did show the least amount of shotgun apes ever. So while I'm not sure if Bungie would actually implement it, I can see them considering it. Now, getting into the more drastic changes, I think there would be very few. However, there could be one in particular that I will talk about later. The reason I don't think these changes will happen is due to Bungie wanting to keep the feel of Trials as close to the original as possible. The following are what I could see happening that would have a greater impact on the landscape of Trials as a whole. Map rotations are one drastic change that I could see happening. While it may not seem that big, veteran Trials players will know that whenever Trials was out, there would only be one map that was played for the duration of the weekend. Implementing a map rotation does have some advantages, such as keeping the game feeling somewhat fresh, more diversity in gameplay and gunplay, and finally, it would be harder for players to find exploits in the maps being played if there are multiple to choose from. One reason to go against this would be that this system has been a staple of Trials from the very beginning, and is really the only game mode in all of Destiny to do anything similar. Personally, I would not like this change if it happened. While it is purely based on nostalgia, I think other veteran players can somewhat agree with me. Frequency can be another thing that could be changed. Some players want Trials to be an even more exclusive event than Iron Banner. What this would basically mean is that the way Iron Banner and Trials would come about would be flipped. Iron Banner on the weekends and Trials every once in a while. I have to say that while I don't agree with it, when talking about this would be somewhat cool. The exclusivity of Trials and thus the Lighthouse would skyrocket, also meaning that only the most well-prepared and skillful players would be the ones to make it flawless. This would also feel like much more like of a tournament, giving players explicit times in the year that when it is possible to go flawless. There would also be potential for world's first to Lighthouse things, which would be very awesome to see on things like Twitch. With all that being said, and when talking about all the somewhat drastic and even the highly drastic changes, I don't think we will see much of a change overall. Like I said many times, I think Bungie wants to keep the feel of Trials the same, so making it drastically different would heavily impact that. Trials was an amazing thing when looking at its strength and its weaknesses. It gave normal players the close glimpse to what competitive Destiny is like, and also, while I have confidence that Bungie will bring Trials back, it is not 100%. They could very well just leave competitive as the highest level of PvP, and no one could really do anything about it. But beyond that, Trials will live on as one of the greatest game modes in all of gaming, giving me hours worth of memories and nostalgia that will never be forgotten. Thank you guys for listening, and hopefully I'll see you at the Lighthouse.